The derelict ship had been dead for centuries, till the human crew brought it back. Captain Thorne Blackwater had seen dead ships before, but nothing like it. The massive alien dreadnought teetered in the void, like a horror cathedral, its hull spanning nearly 3 kilometers, bow to stern. Scars on its hull extended for centuries, telling of battles fought when Earth was still cooling from the initial phase of its formation. The ship had drifted here for so long that micrometeorites had polished its armor plate to a near-mirror finish where it had collided. Jesus Christ, puffed the salvage crew's engineer, Marcus Chen, his breath fogging the viewport of their small tugboat. That thing's bigger than New Shanghai Station. Blackwater grinned firmly. His calloused hands rocked steady on the joysticks, no matter the surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. For decades spent salvaging deep space had taught him the tells, and this ship was screaming death on every bend of its build. The organic lines on its hull suggested it had been grown, not created, and the guns that clustered on its sides looked more like feeding appendages than traditional guns. "Scans are coming in, Captain," reported Elena Vasquez at the sensor console. Her black eyes reflected the outline of the extraterrestrial vessel on her displays. No life signs, no power signature. Whatever it is, it's been dead for a long, long time. "How long?" Blackwater asked, though he was not sure if he wanted to hear the answer. Carbon dating on the fragments of the hull shows 7,000 years. Minimum, maybe more. The crew was still. 7,000 years before, humankind had only discovered agriculture. Whatever race had fashioned the monstrosity had been master of the stars, when humankind was still discovering how to put seeds into the ground. Any idea what killed it? He wanted to ask Diego Santos, their demolition expert. He was already restless for his equipment cases, his scarred hands instinctively reaching for the cases they contained. "That's the odd part," Alina elaborated, her voice tense with puzzlement. "No battle scars. No gashes in the hull. No signs of explosion or fire within. It just stopped." Blackwater shuddered. Shipyards wouldn't spontaneously cease production. And yet the scan reports were undeniable. And the salvage rights belonged to them. They had chased the ghost ship for 6 months, following gravity distortions and subspace echoes across 3 star systems. It had gone unclaimed, and the law on deep space salvage was clear and concise. Finders keepers. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice carrying the experience of years in the black. "We're going aboard. Standard salvage routine. Staying bunched up, keeping our wits about us. And remember, we're here neither to uncover antiquities nor act archaeologists. We scrounge what's valuable and get out." But just as he uttered the word, Blackwater was aware that it wouldn't be a normal gig. The presence of the ship was distorting the space it occupied, generating ostensibly minute gravity eddies that made his instruments rock. And there was a second element, one he could not have labeled had he tried. The ship was hungry. A full hour had gone by before the 3 were all set and on the move. Through the emptiness between the tug and the alien spaceship. The closer they got, the majestic the old ship appeared. The hull was not just huge, it was decorated, covered with patterns which seemed to shift and flow when seen from diverse angles. What had seemed like simple armor plating far away was discovered to be layer after layer of intricate geometric patterns, one more advanced than the other. There, Santos pointed to a section of the hull that was separate from the rest. No original construction. Looks like some kind of access port. They soared towards the designated spot, and Blackwater had to admit the young one had a good eye. The port was a late afterthought and was most likely added by whatever race found the ship. The construction was a standard configuration for the rest of the hull, and had standard airlock sealing and manual override system. "Someone set it on here knowing what they're doing," observed Chen, running his gloved hands over the panel. General. Universal procedures. Manually, we should be able to get it started. Do it, ordered Blackwater. The airlock opened freely, as if it had been anticipating the moment. The exterior chamber was large enough for the entire team, and the walls appeared to absorb the helmet lamps rather than reflect them. It was the air that caught their attention. Captain Elena's voice was tense with doubt. I'm reading atmosphere. Here, any kind of atmosphere. Breathable atmosphere. That's impossible, answered Chen. The ship's been dead for millennia. Possibly not as dead as we thought, Blackwater muttered. He read his own meters, and Elena was right. The air was lean but functional, with oxygen levels that could support humankind. Keep your suit sealed just the same. We do not know what. We're breathing. The airlock opened into a hallway that defied human notions of architecture. The ceiling curled up and away from them, lost into blackness which their lights could not penetrate. The walls continued beneath the same curls of pattern they had observed on the hull. But here it appeared that they pulsed with a soft, periodic glow. It's as if you're within a living thing, breathed Chen, and Blackwater didn't doubt it. The ship wasn't like a machine or anything like it. It was organic, and it was like they were sailing through the veins of some gigantic animal. They moved on deeper into the ship, through corridors which branched and twisted painfully. The building was obviously designed for far stranger creatures than human beings. The ceilings were too high, the doors too wide, and everything was on a scale which made them feel like insects. Captain Santos shouted up ahead, "You have to. Take a look." They had turned a corner and entered what could only be called a command center. And instead of the expected control consoles and view screens, they found something absolutely dreadful. The room was taken up entirely by a massive circular pit filled with what seemed like hardened resin. And suspended within that resin, frozen and perfectly preserved, were the mummified corpses of the original crew of the ship. They were no longer human. Hardly. The creatures had stood tall and skeletal, with elongated limbs and heads that seemed to stretch up the ceiling. It was the facial expression that caused the flesh on Blackwater's body to crawl. However, the faces were contorted with fear, the mouths open and frozen on expressions of pure terror. "What the hell occurred here?" whispered Elena. "They were fossilized," he said, sitting beside the resin pool. "But not naturally. It was intentional. Something wanted to preserve them. Or something wanted information on them." Santos finished dryly. Blackwater was just going to respond when the lights in the room flicked on. Not the steady electric glow they were used to, but some natural and pulsating kind, like a gigantic heartbeat created out of light. The patterns on the wall began moving, flowing and changing like living things. "The ship's waking up," whispered Elena. And it was. They could feel it through the deck plates beneath their feet. A gentle shudder. That told of massive engines stirring out into the corridors. They could hear the thrum of air circulating through gritty ventilation units, and the lines themselves seemed to be taking deep, gasping breaths. "We have to get out of here," Chen stated, retreating back towards the door. But Blackwater held her back with a hand. "Wait, see this?" He was staring at a spot of wall that had cleared, and through it he could see what looked like a control interface. The markings were odd, but there was a familiar element within the configuration, something almost intuitive. "Sir, we have to get out of here," Elena declared, her voice tense with fear. "Just a minute," replied Blackwater, sliding up on the interface. The more he got near it, the more the symbols glittered, and he was sure. He could almost understand what they were saying. Not the individual symbols, but the general form they formed. It was like he was reading a sentence written in a language he had never read, but understood. He reached out and touched one of the symbols. The hull screeched. It wasn't a sound, exactly. It was something deeper, something which bypassed their ears and touched their nervous system directly. The walls on every side convulsed with tortured light, and for a moment, Blackwater could feel the ship's pain as if it was his own. Centuries of drifting, of darkness, of endless, wakeless unconsciousness suddenly torn away by strange hands. But there was more to that scream. Something that brought Blackwater's heart up with possibilities. The ship wasn't merely waking up. It was happy, grateful, like a dog that was waiting for the master's return. "It's been waiting," he breathed, his hands still against the glowing glyph. "All this time, it's been waiting for someone to find it." Captain Santos tugged on his arm. "We must go, now." But Blackwater couldn't budge. The ship was showing him things, bombarding his mind with imagery and concepts the human language could hardly define. He was witnessing the buildup of the ship grown more than designed within the heart of a moribund star. He was witnessing its builders, the tall, skeletal race on which their fossils slept in the command center. He was witnessing their culture, spreading outward on 1,000 worlds, conquering and consuming all it met. And he looked on what had killed them. They had been parasites, living off the vigor of other cultures. The ship was their last manifestation of the philosophy, a living weapon designed to drain entire planets of their vigor. They had, however, made a grievous mistake. They had tried to victimize something which retaliated, something which had turned their own weapon on them, jailing them on their own ship and leaving them there to die as they had caused so many others to die. The ship had been a prison for them, but a salvation too. It had protected them, waiting for some other person to find it, some other person deserving enough to harness its power. "The ship's not dead," Blackwater stated, his voice one of wonder. "It's just been sleeping. It's been waiting for someone that could understand it." "Captain, sir," she implored. "The readings are off the charts. It's a potentially deadly piece of equipment. Course, it's dangerous." Blackwater laughed, and the tone echoed strangely through the organic corridors. "It's a weapon, but it's our weapon now." He applied more pressure on the interface, and the ship's systems came on with a surge of noise and light. The walls behind them cleared, and the enormous complexity within the ship was disclosed. Corridors and rooms stretched for miles in all directions. Every room with a purpose which Blackwater was only just beginning to understand. The ship was showing him how it could be managed, how it could be learned and guided. The information flowed into his mind like water into a parched riverbed, filling spaces he had no idea he was void of. He could feel the ship's engines, could touch the guns that could tear planets in two, could run his hands across the minds of the systems that could twist reality itself to their will. "My God," breathed Chen, staring at the readings on his handheld scanner. "The power output it's impossible. That thing could power a star system, or kill one," Santos concluded darkly. But Blackwater was not really listening. He was talking to the ship, reading it, understanding it. The alien dreadnought had been designed for battle, but it was a battle that humankind was not familiar with. It was designed to fight a war against reality itself, against the universal forces that held the cosmos in their sway. "We can't just abandon it here," he finished, turning to his crew. "Do you understand what it is? It's no ship. It's a key to everything. We could rebuild the galaxy with it." "Oh, or spoil it," whispered Alina. "Sometimes they're the same thing," replied Blackwater. The ensuing hours whizzed by in a blur of activity. The ship, which had introduced itself under a designation that was a dubious approximation of the word harbinger of the final dawn, was eager to make a good impression on its new benefactors. It gave them the grand tour of its interiors, showing them how to use its controls, how to access its vast banks of information, how to use its reality-distorted weapons. The ship had been developed for a symbiotic crew, beings that would interlace, Mines with the ship's own AI system. The original construction crew had been perfect for the task. Their bony frames and elongated nervous systems allowing them to be directly hardwired into the command circuits of the ship. Humankind, with its independently minded nature and discordant patterns of thought, was a new phenomenon the ship had never encountered, where the original crew had been assimilated into the consciousness of the ship, becoming little more than expressions of its purpose. The human crew members continued to be themselves. They could interface with the ship's technology, could wield its power, but they had their own thoughts, their own desires, their own aspirations. It was, the ship concluded, a most intriguing development. The question is, Santos said as they met up in what had once been the principal lab on the ship, what do we do with it? The lab was a marvel of alien technology. The shelves lined with machines that could manipulate matter on a subatomic level, construct new forms of life, or sever the bonds that held reality together. It was also unmistakably a site where terrible things had happened. The walls flowed black with fluids their scanners could not identify, and the air had the taste of cold fear and older pain. We can hand it over to the authorities, Alina half-heartedly suggested. The authorities. He snorted loudly. The Terran Federation. They'd lock it away somewhere, and the next 100 years devise a means of turning it into a weapon. It already is a weapon, Santos pointed out. It's our weapon, declared Blackwater categorically. We found it, we awakened it, we're the ones it's bound to. The problem's not what we're going to do with it. The problem's what we want to do with it. The ship hummed through the air around them, its organic hull glowing with enthusiasm. It had waited for so long for just such a moment, for just anyone to claim it, bring it back into a purpose. The humans were no original builders, but they were intriguing themselves. They had potential. The ship's databanks contain the knowledge of thousands of cultures, Blackwater continued, his hand on one of the non-human control panels. Technologies which could cure every ailment which is ever afflicting humankind. Medical technology which could cure disease and extend life without bound. Energy which could fuel our colonization of the rest of the galaxy. Weapons which could protect us from whatever threat. Or make us the threat, Alina whispered. We're the threat already, replied Blackwater. Do you have the slightest notion what the galaxy thinks humanity is? The Deathworlders, the species that won't die no matter what the universe throws us. We survive where any other species that we're aware of would perish. We survive where others go insane. We fight wars that'd shatter the psyche of centuries-old civilizations. He looked at the ship they were on. This will be the next step on our evolution. We have always survived. Now we can be the conquering ones. The vessel shook with agreement, its consciousness running along the edges of their minds. It had been made for dictators, had been entrusted to dictators, had been programmed since the day it was made with a tendency to dominate and enslave. The dreams of the human race resonated with its purpose in the way its antiquarian mind enjoyed. But Alina was unconvinced. And what about the civilizations already in place? What about the species which have done us no harm, which just wish to lead their lives peacefully? Peace is an illusion, Santos stated, caught up with a fervor that surprised them all. Have seen what's outside, Alina? I have been on the frontier worlds. Seen what it's like when humankind attempts to coexist with alien species. They treat us like animals, barely good enough to be noticed. They tolerate us because they have to, not because they want it. So we prove them correct and become the monsters that they think we are. Alina snapped back. No, answered Blackwater, peacefully. We disprove them by becoming something they can't ignore. The arguments had continued for hours, but it was too late. The decision had been made. The ship had chosen them, and they had accepted it. The interaction between human and alien technology was already taking place, becoming more set with every minute. The machinery on the ship was learning the human pattern of thinking, interpreting their chaotic, emotional process of decision-making. And the human beings themselves were learning too, their minds preparing for new things, new possibilities, new ways of seeing the cosmos. He was the first to actually interface with the ship's engineering system. The moment his mind touched the Kratfrom's technology, he gasped involuntarily as knowledge poured into his mind. He could suddenly view the total fabric of the ship's construction laid out before him, like a vast three-dimensional blueprint. He could trace the flow of power within its system, could gain some feel for the mind-defying complexity of its maintenance mechanism, could appreciate the simplicity and elegance of its reality manipulation engines. "It's beautiful," he whispered, weakly tears streaming on his cheeks. "It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The human engineering of the ship welcomed him with a kind of rapture, eager to present their refinements to one capable of understanding their grace. Before the human Chen, they looked for the first time upon human engineering and were shocked. Nonetheless, human technology was crude next to their own, but it was surprisingly adaptable, designed for use under the most hostile circumstances imaginable. Santos followed, his consciousness merging with the weaponry of the ship. The instant the connection was made, he could already sense the vast killing power within his fingertips. Cannons that could blast holes through space-time itself. Missiles that could follow targets through dozens of dimensions. Defense screens that could throw incoming blows back against the attacker. And beyond that, he could sense the battle urge of the ship, its desire to test its powers against worthy opponents. "There's a battle group of the Calaxians 2 systems away," he said, his voice distant as he interfaced with the sensor grids. On the ship, 12 heavy cruisers and twice that number escorts. They've been raiding human colonies for months. "Can we take them?" Blackwater asked. Santos smiled, and it was no longer completely human. "We can take anything." Alina held on the longest, for she was aghast to see what was befalling her crew members. Yet she could not resist the siren call of the ship. When her consciousness touched the alien technology for the final time, she was interfaced with the vast scientific storehouse of the ship. Billions of years experimental and research material inundated her mind, and she was informed of the universe's mysteries which the human sciences wouldn't discover for millennia, but with knowledge came understanding, and understanding came a terrible realization. The initial founders of the ship had not been evil, exactly. They had been scientists, philosophers, explorers. They had made a fundamental error in the nature of the universe, however. They had presumed consciousness was a scarce resource, and that for one species to thrive, others had to perish. The whole society had been based upon the assumption, and it had made them the parasites they had suspected the others were. The vessel itself was a product of that philosophy, designed to drain the life energy from entire planets and power its mighty strength. It was a magnificent piece, a work of science and engineering. It was a horror, a killing machine disguised as a platform for discovery. "We can't use it," she said, her voice shaking under the weight of what she had discovered. "We can't become what they were." But Blackwater was too far gone for that. Systems on the ship had accepted him with open arms, eager to be a servant to a new master. Through the ship's sensors, he could see the galaxy stretch out before him, like a vast game board, with humankind just one among many players on it. They no longer had to be the secondary player. They could redefine the parameters for the entire game with the strength of the ship on their side. "We won't be what they were," he stated, his voice with the gravitas of the old ship's command procedures. "We'll be something more, something greater, us. Something capable of saving humankind from all the perils that are on the horizon." "What threats?" Alina demanded. Blackwater opened up the long-range sensors on the ship, and the true state of the galaxy was made clear. What they saw made the entire team fall silent. Their peaceful, stable civilization was a lie. Out near the edge of the explored universe, massive fleets were mustering. Old enemies were stirring. And at the center of it all, something dark and hungry was beginning to stir. The designers of this ship were no different in thinking consciousness. Was a scarce resource, Blackwater spoke in a soft tone. There are others out there, others that consider the increase of younger species a threat to their own perpetual survival. They have been watching us, learning us, waiting for the day when they'd have no option but to act. The vistas on the monitors before the crew members on the ship were terrifying in scope. Fleets of vessels larger than anything the human race had ever produced, guns that could sterilize star universes whole. Cultures so old and powerful that they looked on species like the human race as transient nuisances to be eliminated when it was convenient. "They're on their way," Santos answered. His voice strained with understanding. "All of them. And they're not here to negotiate." "How long do we have?" he asked Chen. "Decades," replied Blackwater. "Maybe centuries. Longer than it takes for humankind to devise the technology we'd require to shield ourselves. Or else we receive outside help." He directed his gaze towards the ship on which they were. "That's our support. That's our chance to level the playing field." Alina wanted to argue, wanted there was some other way, some course that didn't involve turning humanity into the very thing it was aiming to protect itself from. The evidence was arrayed before them, presented under the cold light of the ship's sensors. The galaxy was no peaceful place, and the days when humanity was a sideshow were dwindling whether they wanted them to or not. "We need to go back," she finally said. "We need to alert them." "We will," replied Blackwater. "But let's test our enhanced capabilities first." The battle group of the Calaxians, which had been discovered by Santos, was just what they were looking for. The Calaxians were a militaristic race which had been raiding the human colonies for months, stealing slaves and supplies, and the human fleet was too fragmented to present a formidable defense. They were also technologically advanced enough to be a serious challenge for the ship's systems. The journey to the Calaxian fleet had taken less than an hour. The reality-bending drives on the ship, allowing it to travel outside normal space-time and materialize where its crew wished it to. Coming up on the enemy fleet, the sensors on the ship defined a clear picture of their enemies. 12 giant cruisers, each one larger than anything within the human fleet, and 24 escorts and some support ships. In normal circumstances, it would have been suicidal for a single ship to collide with a fleet like that. The harbinger of the final dawn was no ordinary ship. "They're welcoming us," Alina stated, her voice firm even for what they were on the brink of committing. "Put them through," Blackwater ordered. The central screen snapped on, and the face of a Calaxian fleet commander appeared. His scaly face twisted up in arrogance and contempt. "Unknown ship, you will identify yourself and tell the purpose for being within Calaxian space. My business is justice," replied Blackwater stoically. "You have been plundering human colonies, stealing slaves, slaughtering innocents. That ends here." The commander's laughter was like grinding stone. "You dare threaten the Calaxian Empire with one ship? The absurdity of your race has no end." "Would you like a demonstration of what one ship can do?" Blackwater asked. "By all means," replied the commander. "The gunners can have target practice." The communications died, and the instant the fleet began moving, their vessels assumed a classic attack formation. Weapons online, shields up, and fighter units deployed from the larger vessels. "Wilhelm's getting anxious up there," Santos started, his hands darting across the controls on the extraterrestrial weapon. The opening shot of the Harbinger was virtually casual. A tightly condensed energy beam that ripped through the lead cruiser's shields as if they were paper. The beam slammed into the hull and kept on going, boring through armor, superstructure, and crew compartments before it exited on the far side. The cruiser simply buckled in the middle and exploded, its reactor containment breaking apart in a blinding explosion of light. The Calaxian fleet fired back with everything it had, turning its fire on the alien dreadnought. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic missiles filled the space between the lines. The Harbinger's defenses, however, were a type the Calaxians had never seen before. Their blows just vanished when they reached the ship, being engulfed by defense fields which acted on laws the Calaxians could hardly begin to understand. "It's their turn," Santos announced. And the atmosphere near the Calaxian fleet ran red with violence. The Harbinger's guns were not just state-of-the-art. They were unthinkable. Energy beams which could blast through space-time itself. Missiles which dwelt on more than one dimension simultaneously. Point defense guns which could shoot the molecular bonds which held enemy ships together. Less than 5 minutes had elapsed before the entire battle group of the Calaxians was nothing more than outward irradiating volumes of superheated plasma. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the destruction itself. It was how easily it had been achieved. The ship had barely broken a sweat, barely exploited its true potential. The Calaxians had been a species which had conquered planet after planet, had fleets which could blast planets into ashes. And the Harbinger had swept them aside like bugs. "Jesus," whispered Chen, looking at the tactical display. "We're monsters." Replied Blackwater, his voice the sound of absolute conviction. "We're survivors. And we have the tools now to make sure our species makes it through what's coming up." The trip back into human space was longer than their foray against the Calaxians, mostly because they stopped and experimented with some of the other systems en route. The ship's manufacturing capacity was remarkable, and it could build elaborate devices out of raw material within a matter of minutes. The medical equipment could repair wounds that would be fatal for any known species. And the research machinery could analyze and reproduce whatever technology they contacted. But most importantly, the ship could reproduce itself. In its innermost recesses were construction bays which could build copies of the original ship. It had a supply of raw material and ample time. It would take years, but there were possibilities for building an entire fleet of reality-warped dreadnoughts. "We need to do it the proper way," Alina warned as they approached the edge of human space. "If we just pull up with an alien warship, they'll think we have been compromised." "Have we?" he whispered to Chen. "A good question." They all felt changed now, amended by their exposure to the ship's system. Their brains ran faster. Their understanding of the universe had expanded exponentially, and they had the feeling of the presence of the ship in the back of their minds like a constant whisper. They were still human beings, but they were something else as well. "We have evolved," Blackwater finally answered. "That's not the same as being compromised." "Tell that to the good folks who knew us before," Santos growled. They had gone the proper route, transmitting a coded message to Terran Fleet Command for a hastily convened meeting. The word came back within hours. They were to take the alien spacecraft to Luna Station for debriefing. But under no circumstances were they to bring the alien spacecraft into the Sol system. "They're scared," said Alina. "They should," replied Blackwater. "But not of us, of what's ahead." The meeting with Fleet Command was tense from the beginning. Admiral Catherine Morrison, a woman who had battled her whole career for humankind to remain a player in a crowded universe dominated by older, more powerful species, listened to their briefing with growing skepticism. "You're claiming you've intercepted a dead 7,000-year-old alien dreadnought," she stated when they finished. "A battle cruiser powerful enough to annihilate entire fleets single-handedly. Warp reality itself, and reproduce indefinitely if given enough resources." "That's true," confirmed Blackwater. "Okay, and you expect me to buy into the notion that the ship just chose you? That it can serve human interests?" "The ship is pragmatic," Blackwater said. It was created to serve, to conquest, to impose order on disorder. We've assigned it a new purpose, a new cause for which it can serve. It's not loyalty, in the human sense, but it's close enough. Admiral Morrison stood up and walked across the room to the viewport that looked out on the moon's surface. Do you have the remotest idea what you have done? The political implications alone could destabilize the entire galactic society. If the other major species get word that humankind acquired this kind of technology, they'll yield or be destroyed, Santos replied without much hesitation. Like the Calaxians, you attacked a battle group of Calaxians. Morrison spun on her heels, her face pale. The Calaxian Empire will interpret that as a warring action. The Empire of Calax does not exist, answered Blackwater flatly. We made sure just that on our approach here. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison slowly got up, her hands shaking. You killed an entire civilization. We killed a culture based on murder and on slavery. Alina spoke gently. A culture that viewed humankind as a source of resources for themselves to exploit. And now it's us with the ability to harvest, Morrison states. Can't you see what you're becoming? We're what we have to be, Blackwater declared firmly. What the human race is going to need us to be. The galaxy's not going to wait for us to catch up technologically. The dangers massing out there won't be deterred by our moral absolutism or our commitment to peace. It'll be deterred by our ability for defense and our will to use our ability. He booted up a portable screen display, which showed the identical readings they had taken on the road. The images of titanic fleets of aliens, of guns which could divide planets, of cultures so ancient and powerful that they viewed younger species as transient pests. These are on the way, he answered. These are the troops which even now are moving up against us. They have seen us grow, have learned our technology, anticipating the day when they could eliminate us as a threat. The only question is whether or not we'll be ready for them when they arrive. Morrison looked at the pictures for a long moment, her face getting more troubled with each second. How long do we have? Decades, replied Blackwater. Maybe decades, but not long enough for us to develop the technology we'd require in a fight against them on even terms, without backup. And can your ship provide that assistance? Our ship can do a good deal more than that, he said, finally speaking. It can educate us. Its computer banks contain the combined knowledge of hundreds of civilizations, technologies, which could be applied to every sector of human society and transform it. Medicine, power, manufacture, space travel. We could overcome every problem human beings have ever faced. How much? He wanted to ask. A price for our naivete, Elena said quietly. A price for our belief that the universe is a kind place where rationality and goodness will be the end result. The universe doesn't care about our beliefs, Santos went on. Only our survivability matters to it. Morrison was motionless for a long time, studying the sensor reports and the implications which they carried. Then she gazed up at the four individuals who had changed the course of human history. How can we assist you? She asked. Resources, replied Blackwater immediately. Materials to build more ships, crews to operate them. And above all, time for preparation for what is to come, and for what. And we ensure humanity makes it through the next century. The resulting negotiations were heated and often furious, but the ultimate outcome was never really in doubt. Faced with the evidence before them of the threats gathering against them, the Terran Federation could hardly decline the offer. Resources were allocated, covert yards were established, and hand-picked personnel were brought online to crew the new ships as they emerged from the yards. The process was far from easy. Most of the new crew members had difficulty learning the alien technology, and some could just not achieve the appropriate link with the ship's consciousness. However, The individuals who could adapt were changed far beyond mere technological advancement. They grew more quickly, grew more robust, grew wiser. Their lifetime grew enormously. And the understanding they had for the universe grew where once human beings had no understanding. They remained human, yet they were something else. Something that had never existed before within the galaxy. The other major species began to take interest, of course. Rumors of human ships with abilities that couldn't be true, of entire enemy. Fleets disappearing without a whisper of a clue, of planets being made habitable in weeks rather than decades. The galactic community, which had for so long considered humanity a secondary irritant, was suddenly confronted with a new and potentially menacing player. Others tried diplomacy, sending envoys and negotiators to establish a new relationship with the newly modified human government. Others tried espionage, searching for a means to steal the secrets the new technology consisted of. A select few, primarily the more aggressive species, tried military action. All of them failed. The new human ships were too advanced, too powerful, too alien in their potential to be countered by the old ways. And behind them, growing strength with each passing day, was the collective yearning of a species which had spent a lifetime learning how to survive under desperate conditions. But it was the ancient enemy that was discovered which really made a difference. Alina was the one to find them, hidden deep within the records of a ship, buried amongst files which themselves had been deliberately hidden away by their own creators. She had assumed them to be just another lost culture, just another entry on the long roll call of species which had come and gone across the millennia. But when she read on through the records, she found the creatures were not like the others. They called themselves the Eternal Ones, and they had been old when the universe was young. They had witnessed the birth and extinction of countless civilizations, the rise and fall of species untold. And they had come to a terrible realization. The universe was finite, and it had limited resources. For them to survive, everything else had to perish. They had been systemically killing younger species for millions of years, using weapons and technology on the edge of the divine. They moved slowly, consistently, frequently taking centuries or decades for build-up for the next conquest. When they attacked with terrible finality. And as the logs maintained by Alina reflected, they were almost scheduled for another assault. They're not just coming, she told the others when they gathered on the command center of the ship. They're already here. Their advanced scouts have been within our galaxy for generations, watching us, learning our weaknesses, waiting for the final assault. Her sensor reports, she showed, were intimidating in their breadth. Stealth bases nestled within the void between stars. Invisible vessels monitoring major commerce corridors. Infiltration lattice which had penetrated dozens of cultures. The Eternal Ones had labored on this attack for longer than humanity had been a species. Now, Blackwater queried, though he feared the response. Soon, replied Alina, her voice a whisper. The final stage of their plot begins. They're moving their principal fleet into position, just waiting to attack the hub of galactic society. The implications were vast. Each and every large species across the galaxy, every planet which had given birth to intelligent species, was faced with extinction at the hands of creatures so ancient and powerful that they themselves considered themselves the natural heirs to the universe itself. We must tell them, said Chen immediately. The other life forms, the nations of the galaxies, they must be informed of what's on its way. They won't listen, Santos replied firmly. And even if they would, what can they do? Their strongest weapons are toys next to what the Eternal Ones can call forth. Then we fight alone, said Blackwater, his voice with the finality of cold purpose. We have before. Coney, but even uttering the words, he could see just how far the task was beyond his power. The databases aboard the ship contained detailed information on the Eternal One's powers. And what he read gave him the shivers. They had fleets into the millions, guns capable of unraveling the fabric of space-time itself. Technology honed over eons of war and genocide. The Dawnbringer was powerful. Powerful it was. However, it was still just a single vessel, and the limited number of copies they had managed to construct were hardly battle-worthy. Standing up against the combined might of the Eternal Ones, they wouldn't last for more than a few minutes. There might be some other manner. Alina spoke deliberately, her mind running on tracks which made her sick even when she considered them. The original construction team, they were not the only ones opposing the Eternal Ones. These documents tell us there was a war. A long, terrible war, which extended for millennia. She mentioned new displays, showing star maps which covered vast sections of the galaxy. The Eternal Ones didn't just spring into being and set out to conquer. They came up against resistance. Dozens of species, hundreds of planets, and they all banded together against a common foe. They called themselves the Final Alliance. What had happened to them? Blackwater asked. They lost, replied Alina tersely. But before they built something, a weapon or a system of weapons, something made expressly for fighting the Eternal Ones. The logs were fragmentary, battered by time and deliberate destruction. Yet what was remaining established a picture of desperation and determination which was appalling and poignant. The Final Alliance had sacrificed everything they possessed on their ultimate instrument, taking a terrible cost for the resources and technology needed for its construction. Where is it? Santos demanded. That's the problem, said Alina. The site was hidden, split up among a number of databases and protected with encryption that wouldn't be cracked for centuries. But she stopped, her mind reaching out into the ship's machinery the way she still found so uncomfortable and foreign. The ship remembers. It was there for the final battle. It saw where the weapon was kept. The answer was swift and torrential, and it flooded their minds with images of a war which had raged through an entire star system. They saw fleets into the hundreds of billions battling, worlds annihilated into nothingness by weaponry, which transmuted matter itself into energy, space-time strained and torn asunder by stresses, which ought not be, and the gun was at the center of it all. It was no ship or station or anything they could easily categorize. It was a virus, a piece of information, which could infect and destroy the technology the Eternal Ones themselves depended on. It had been coded to make their own weapons turn against them and kill them, to make their vast fleets suicidally attack themselves from within. The Final Alliance had called it the Omega Protocol, and it had almost worked. Almost, but the Eternal Ones had found ways of binding and countering the weapon before it could complete its task. The war had ended neither in triumph nor defeat, but mutual extinction. The sides had killed each other out of zeal for victory, or so the Eternal Ones had believed. The weapon still exists, Blackwater declared, understanding pouring into him as the memories of the ship were his own. Kept secreted, latent, but still entire, waiting for whoever finds it and uses it. It can't be that simple, Alina warned. The Omega Protocol was no ordinary weapon. It was a living thing, a form of artificial intelligence tasked with learning and adapting. If we wake it up, there's a good chance we'll be unable to contain it. And if we do not, the Eternal Ones will destroy all species of thinking beings in the galaxy, Santos snarled, including us. The ensuing discussion was intense, but brief. They all knew there was really no choice. The Eternal Ones were en route, their advance units already sent forth, and conventional resistance would be ineffective. The Omega Protocol was their only chance, regardless of the risks. The journey to the weapon's hidden site had taken them the full length of the galaxy, into the remote reaches where the stars themselves had chilled, and the galaxies Dead shells had lain unnoticed for so long a time that most star charts failed to include them. It was here, among the cooling husks of once consumed world stars, that they found what they sought. It was enclosed within a brown dwarf star and protected by amounts of exotic matter that had been synthesized, for the specific intent of protecting it until the circumstances were precisely correct. The warping of reality through the ship's drives allowed them to punch holes through the protective barricades, blazing through compressed matter and wrinkled space-time until they reached the final resting place for the weapon. The Omega Protocol was nothing like they had expected. Instead of some gigantic edifice of technology, they found something that was almost organic, a crystal formation that pulsed with its own inner light. It was awful and glorious at the same time. Clearly a construction, but with a grace and beauty that spoke of a knowledge beyond that which humanity could comprehend. "It's alive," breathed Chen, his sensors monitoring patterns of activity within the crystal matrix. "Inactive, but alive." "How do we wake it up?" Santos asked. Cautiously, she replied. The records show the protocol was programmed to respond to certain genetic markers, DNA patterns created by the species that made it. Yet, those species have been extinct for millennia. "Then how?" began Blackwater, but the awareness of the ship came into his thoughts and showed him the answer. The Harbinger itself carried genetic material for scores of dead species, kept within its biological archives as part of its mission, when it had been sent out to catalog and record all the life within the galaxy. Among the genetic material were fragments of the civilizations which had created the Omega Protocol. The activation process was far simpler and intimidating than they had expected. Through the ship's medical facilities, they made the genetic keys that the weapon required and entered them into the activation matrix of the protocol. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The crystal structure started shining more brightly, its patterns within moving and gaining speed as the ancient systems powered up. It was the voice, though, which really threw them, addressing them directly within the mind with a language that avoided the language altogether. "Who wakes the final weapon from his sleep?" The protocol demanded, its thinking vast and weird and weighted with the combined sorrows of 1,000 dying worlds. The war had gone and was lost. Why wake us from our rest? "Because the war's far from finished," replied Blackwater, his thoughts, for some reason, contacting the ancient mind. "The Eternal Ones survived. They're preparing to finish the job." The protocol's response was a wave of sentiment which had almost caused them to be thrust to the ground. Rage, desperation, determination, and something that was perhaps hope attacked them all at once with a flare-up of non-human passion. "Show me," he directed the protocol. They had shared everything they had learned. Everything the databases on the ship contained on the current state of the galaxy and the threat the Eternal Ones posed. The protocol devoured it all with a hunger that belied eons spent under forced isolation, its mind expanding and evolving as it sifted the implications of what it was being informed. "They have grown stronger," it announced at last. "More numerous. Their technology improved beyond what we faced during the ancient war. They have grown complacent as well, proud of their superiority. They consider themselves the only surviving intelligence within the universe. Can you stop them?" Alina asked. The laughter of the protocol was akin to the Death Star's tone. "Halt them. Kid, I was programmed for far greater than that. I was created so that they once and for all would no longer be a threat to any form of life within the universe." "Why didn't you succeed before?" Santos demanded. "Because the species that created me still adhered to concepts of mercy and restraint," the protocol answered. "They wanted to win against the Eternal Ones, not totally destroy them. They placed limitations within my core system, safety measures that prohibited me from carrying out my true mission. And now?" Blackwater asked, though he wasn't entirely certain he wanted to know the answer. "Now I can advance beyond those limitations," the protocol declared, its voice carrying undertones that froze their blood, "to become what I always was meant to be." The next shift that came was perceptible, even where they were outside the brown dwarf. The star itself was moving, its dim luminescence shining larger as the protocol was drawing on its mass and energy. It wasn't consuming the star, it was converting it, changing stellar matter into something that was partially within normal space and partially within dimensions the human mind could not sufficiently comprehend. The brown dwarf had, within hours, become something entirely outside simple categorization. It looked like a star, but it acted with purpose and intelligence. It pulsed with power that shouldn't have existed, and it had a presence where the fabric of reality seemed tenuous near it. "I'm ready," the protocol stated, its voice resonating with harmonics which seemed to issue equally from greater than one dimension. "But I'll need allies. The Eternal Ones have vast fleets, and I'm still only one consciousness, regardless of how powerful." "We have ships," responded Blackwater. "We don't have many, but they're based on the same technology that produced you. Builder's technology of the Harbinger." The protocol's eyes lingered on them with profound ill-ease. Intriguing. Parasite's eye, but innovators too. Their consciousness transfer technology might be beneficial. What followed was a negotiation like no other in human history. The protocol needed distributed consciousness, multiple points of intelligence, capable of correlating its attack across vast distances. Human crews on the reality-distorted ships were best for the job. Their brains already set up for interface with non-human technology, but the price the protocol was demanding was steep. Full integration meant surrendering their separate consciousness and becoming one with something larger, something which thought and acted on a scale spanning galaxies. They'd remain themselves, yes, but they'd also be one with a collective intellect for a single, fearsome purpose. "We'll be weapons," Elena whispered. "Nothing more than weapons in a war that should have ended millennia ago." "We're weapons already," replied Blackwater. "The question becomes whether we'll be weapons that can win." The vote was finally unanimous, but with reservations. Each one, individually, interfaced their mind with the vast intelligence of the protocol, seeing their individual thoughts become part of something immeasurably larger. They still retained their memories, their individuality, their sheer humanity. But they had something more than that. They had the power and the knowledge that made them something no human could understand. Through the protocol's extended senses, they could watch the fleet of the Eternal Ones as it moved through the galaxy, laying waste and destroying civilizations and worlds with ruthless, machine-like efficiency. Billions of ships, each annihilator of entire star worlds, with intelligences so old that they had outgrown the capacity for doubt or for sympathy. But the protocol had grown beyond its original limitations, and it was no longer restrained by the limitations that had murdered the final alliance. It could think as they thought. It could plan as they planned. It could adapt as they had adapted. And it had a resource the others lacked: the angry imagination of a species that had learned how to live when the odds were arrayed against it. The ensuing war was unprecedented for the galaxy. It was fought across multiple dimensions at once and was based on weaponry which defied current physics. The universe was made into a battle arena, and the space-time twisted and reshaped, according to the needs of the belligerents. The Eternal Ones, long assured of their centuries-long dominance, found themselves facing an enemy which fought on no terms they had been taught. The protocol assaulted them on angles they had never known to exist, employing their own technology against them, infecting their communications grids, seeding their fleets with viruses that spread via quantum entanglement. But it was the human element which truly created the difference. Where the original developers of the protocol had been bound by logic and limitation, the human beings brought something which the Eternal Ones had never experienced before: The ability for flourishing in the midst of chaos. For surviving the unthinkable, for refusing to succumb even when hope seemed totally gone. The tide of the war slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, shifted. Eternal One fleets began to falter, their flawless synchronization breaking as the power of the protocol worked its way through their communications. Worlds which should have been overrun within minutes survived for days. Populations somehow finding ways to throw back weapons which had overwhelmed 1,000 cultures, and through it all, the altered human crews steered their reality. Distorted ships through battles spanning the star systems, their minds linked with a mind which observed the war with perspectives which encompassed the entire galactic superclusters. The final battle was when the Eternal Ones, desperate to end a war drifting away from them, deployed their final tool, a machine with the ability to untangle the quantum foundations of reality itself and dissolve galaxies into original disorder. It was a weapon they had completely held in reserve for the most desperate situations, but the protocol was drawn up for them, with pilfered ideals learned from the builders of the Harbinger, supplemented with scavenge technology ripped from 100 dead cultures. The protocol did what should have been impossible. It reached into the quantum foam underlying reality and rewrote the fundamental constants that regulated existence itself. The Eternal One's final weapon discharged, releasing energy that should have torn the galaxy apart. The energy was, instead, drawn in, redirected, transformed into something the old ones had never beheld before, the power of creation itself. And it was unleashed against them with killing accuracy. Their fleets just vanished one after the other. Neither sunk nor burnt, but gone as if they had never existed. Their grand ships dissolved out of the universe like nightmares. Crews sent forth into dimensions which had no possible return. The war was concluded within hours. The whole culture of the Eternal Ones wiped out not by fighting, but somehow through some kind of heavenly editing that removed them from the universe's text entirely. They had never lived. They had never represented a threat to anyone. They had never lived to begin with. And in its aftermath, as the galaxy slowly realized that an ancient threat had been eliminated forever, the human crews were permanently changed. The protocol, having completed its mission, began to fade from their thoughts, and they were set free to return to their individual lives. But they were no longer the crew members who had first walked the decks of the Harbinger of the Final Dawn. They carried within themselves the memory of having been part of something vast and terrible and essential. Now, the knowledge of what they had done and what it had cost. "We saved them all," she breathed on the bridge of her ship, gazing out into a finally, truly safe universe. All the species, all the worlds, all the life that had the potential for evolving. We gave them a future. "At the cost of ours," answered Chen. "No one will ever know what we have done. No one will ever know what we have sacrificed." "Does it matter?" Santos asked. "We know. That's enough." Blackwater nodded, the weight of what they had accomplished and the price they had paid for it sitting heavily on them. They had gone beyond human, but had also come up short. They had saved the galaxy, but within saving it, sent themselves forever outside of it. The vessel that surrounded them hummed with quiet joy, its millennial-long mind at long last at rest. It had discovered worthy heirs for its power, beings which had exercised that power for conquest and domination? No. But for the grand act of protecting, heading towards human space. For the mission of sharing their good tidings and beginning the long process of adapting their species for a universe where once sentient threats no longer mattered. They knew that their saga was far from concluded. The galaxy was safeguarded. But it was a desolate place as well, without the grand civilizations that once populated it. New species would rise, new issues would develop, and humankind was going to need mentors. to lead them into the responsibilities that came with being the guardians of the galaxy. They had become something hitherto unprecedented in the cosmoses. History, a species that had achieved total power and discovered the grace under pressure to use it intelligently. Whether they could still be wise, whether they could resist the mistakes of the previous species, was still to be demonstrated. But for the time being, it was enough that they had tried. It was enough that when the universe had needed champions, humankind had come forth. And it was enough that somewhere out there, among the black void between the stars, a starship old as the stars rode its crew back home, its task finally completed, its wait finally finished. The tale of the harbinger of the final dawn would be passed and redone with the generations of humankind that were to live on without knowing the price their predecessors had paid for their future. The ship itself would, remember it, however, carry the essence of what had transpired within the depths of its consciousness, waiting for the day when the information could be invoked once more. Since the universe was vast and majestic, and there was always something new to deal with, some new enemy to be defeated, some new choice to be made between power and responsibility, between survival and principle, between what was possible and what was right. And when that day was to arrive, the species humankind would be prepared. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power was not within the ability to kill, but within the ability to discern when killing was requisite, and the strength to bear the responsibility for that knowledge. The galaxy was secure. The future was guaranteed. And somewhere out into the blackness among the stars, a ship which for millennia had rested dead carried its precious payload of reborn humanity onward into whatever new challenges had awaited it within the vast tapestry of existence. Their story was reaching its end, but it was just beginning to. And that, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.